She was just another human prisoner among hundreds, silent in the dim corridors where alien guards barked orders and dragged captives from one cell to another. The others had long since broken. Some begged for scraps, some stared hollow-eyed at the metal floors, and some whispered half-mad stories of lost battles and forgotten resistance. To the guards, she was nothing special. A frail figure, too thin to be a threat, too quiet to be noticed, too human to matter. The guards treated her like a shadow. Their voices were always sharp, their laughter cruel, as if her suffering was entertainment. They believed she had no will left, that she was simply another relic of a conquered species clinging to life. They never wondered why she watched so carefully, why her silence was not despair but calculation, why her eyes, even the gloom, still burned with something they had never understood, something they had never truly feared, because they believed humans had been erased from history's stage. For centuries, humanity's presence in the wider galaxy had been mocked. Records were altered amidst twisted, victories erased. Aliens called humans primitive relics, fragile creatures that burned too bright for too short a span of time. They paraded their technological supremacy, declaring themselves masters of a universe where humans were but an afterthought. Enslavement, extermination, assimilation. Each empire had played its part in ensuring humanity's decline. And yet, somehow, the prisoner endured. She carried with her no banner, no weapon, no title, only her voice and a memory she barely understood. When the guards loaded the prisoners onto the warship, they boasted about its legend. It was not just a vessel but a fortress, an ancient creation whose engines had shaken star systems and whose weapons had silenced fleets. To the aliens, the warship was proof of their eternal power. To the prisoners, it was another cage, larger than the last but still unescapable. They shuffled aboard in silence, chains rattling, eyes downcast. None dared to look too long at the vessel's walls, etched with markings no one alive could fully interpret. None except her. The corridors hummed with strange energy. The ship's architecture was different from the aliens' usual designs. Older, sharper, more deliberate. She felt a pulse in the metal as her hand brushed it, almost like a heartbeat. The guard shoved her forward, jeering at her clumsiness, but she had already noticed something they had not. The ship was listening. It began with a whisper. A single word, barely spoken, slipped from her lips as she stumbled in the hallway. It was not a word she remembered learning, yet it rose from her throat like something older than memory itself. The air changed. The lights flickered. A low vibration stirred beneath the floor. The guards cursed, striking the walls as if to demand obedience from the ship, but the moment passed, and they laughed it off as a malfunction. She said nothing, but in her silence was revelation. The ship had heard her. Night after night, in the endless monotony of confinement, she tested it. When the guards were gone, she spoke softly, syllables unformed yet familiar. Each time, the walls shivered faintly, the lights dimmed, the hum of engines shifted. Once, a door's lock stuttered when her voice brushed against the air. Another time, the stale atmosphere in her cell subtly cleared as though the ship itself had decided she needed better air. Small changes, easy to overlook, but undeniable. The guards did not notice. They were too arrogant, too certain of their control. They laughed about the ship as though it were a beast they had tamed, never realizing it was never truly theirs. But she felt it, an awakening, cautious and quiet, like a slumbering giant opening its eyes for the first time in centuries. The ship remembered. Her presence began to matter in ways the aliens could not see. When she coughed, the vents above her cell released a whisper of cleaner oxygen. When her chains dug too deep into her skin, the metal floor beneath her seemed to soften, easing her pain. She began to speak more boldly, crafting words from instincts she did not fully understand. The ship responded with increasing clarity, lights shifting in rhythm with her whispers, systems pulsing in time with her breath. It was not blind obedience. The ship was cautious, as if testing her, as if measuring her worth. But it was listening, and each response was a reminder that she was not powerless. Then came the first true moment of defiance. A scuffle broke out among the prisoners. Hunger and despair had driven two men to violence, and the guards, entertained, let them fight. Blood spattered the floor, and the guards mocked them, betting on who would fall first. She stood among them, silent, but inside her the fire burned hotter than ever. She whispered a word, clearer this time, more deliberate. The floor between the fighters lit with a sudden barrier of force. Both men were thrown back, stunned, their blood steaming as it evaporated against the invisible wall. The guards shouted in shock, pounding at control panels on their wrists. Nothing responded. The barrier held, humming with a resonance that vibrated through her chest. The guards dragged her forward, demanding to know what she had done, but she only looked at them with steady eyes. They called it coincidence, a malfunction, a trick of failing systems. Yet, when they struck her, the ship reacted again. Their weapons sputtered, their armor flickered, their very lights died for a heartbeat before returning. They tried to laugh it off, but unease crept into their voices. The ship had chosen. Every day that followed deepened the bond. She spoke, and systems shifted. She walked, and doors hesitated to close behind her. Even the hum of the engines seemed to harmonize with the rhythm of her breath. The aliens grew restless, whispering of curses, of ghosts in the machine. Some demanded the ship be purged, reset, stripped down to circuits, and rebuilt. Others dismissed it as paranoia. But she knew this was no malfunction. This was recognition. The ship remembered her voice, not because of who she was in the present, but because of what she carried in her blood, in her bones, in the forgotten echoes of her people. Humans had not been erased. Their legacy was written in the very architecture of this vessel, waiting for someone who could awaken it. She had no training, no knowledge of engineering, no formal command, but she had the one thing that mattered, the right to be heard. The first time the ship spoke back, it was only a whisper, barely audible like the breath of an ancient ghost. 3 words pulsing through the walls, command authority recognized. Her chains rattled as the guards dragged her forward, but she did not resist. For the first time in years, she smiled. Not a smile of surrender, but a defiance. The guards could not hear the voice. Only she could. She whispered again, and the ship answered. The aliens did not know it yet, but their fortress had already begun to betray them. The aliens could not ignore it forever. Whispers spread among the crew, rumors of doors that opened without command, of systems that hesitated when ordered, of subtle shifts in power distribution that no engineer could explain. What unsettled them most was that it always seemed to happen when a human prisoner was near. They mocked each other nervously, trying to convince themselves it was random chance, a quirk of old machinery, a miscalibration in the ship's ancient systems. Yet their voices carried unease, for the warship was supposed to be flawless, a masterpiece of their empire, a vessel above weakness. The guards assigned to her grew wary. Where once they shoved her without hesitation, now their hands lingered reluctant, as though some part of them feared retaliation from the walls around them. They reported her movements more carefully, their laughter forced, their strikes more hesitant. Some even avoided her entirely, uneasy with the way lights flickered when she spoke, or how the door side opened at the barest murmur of her voice. She understood their fear better than they did. She had felt the ship responding more clearly each day, adjusting to her, shaping itself to her presence. When her breath grew ragged, the vents released purer oxygen. When her body weakened, nutrient dispensers malfunctioned in her favor, spilling enough to keep her alive. When she closed her eyes and whispered commands she barely understood, lights dimmed and engines hummed as if an acknowledgement. The ship was no longer simply reacting. It was listening. Her fellow prisoners noticed, though most were too broken to question aloud. Some stared at her with suspicion, fearing her as a witch or a traitor. Others began to follow her with quiet hope, seeing in her presence a chance for survival. She spoke little, but her silence carried weight, and those who watched closely realized that the ship itself was bending toward her will. The aliens grew impatient with malfunctions they could not explain. Technicians tore panels, cursed circuits, and replaced modules that were not broken. Each time they declared the issue resolved, the ship betrayed them again, doors locking when they should open, systems refusing to calibrate, weapons briefly unresponsive. Their frustration grew, and with it their suspicion. Yet they refused to see the truth that was becoming undeniable. The warship was no longer theirs. She tested her bond in secret. When the guards left her unattended, she whispered single words. Open, breathe, release. The ship obeyed in subtle ways, as if speaking a language long forgotten but deeply embedded in its core. She did not know how she knew the words, yet they came to her with instinctual certainty, as though buried in the marrow of her bones. Each success emboldened her, and though she never revealed her satisfaction outwardly, her heart beat with growing strength. The first time she commanded the medbay, it was desperation, not defiance. A prisoner collapsed, his body frail from weeks of neglect. The guards laughed, wagering how long before he died. She knelt beside him, placing her hand on the cold floor, whispering words she did not fully form. The medbay doors hissed open, releasing drones that should not have moved without alien command. They scanned the prisoner, administered treatments, and carried him away under the guards' furious protests. Systems locked them out, ignoring their override codes, obeying her alone. Their rage was palpable. They dragged her to interrogation, demanding to know what she had done. But every strike against her failed to yield submission. They shouted that she was powerless, yet their voices trembled as lights dimmed and walls shivered with her every breath. The ship shielded her subtly, draining their weapons, jamming their signals, sealing doors they tried to force open. Their fear became undeniable, though they still refused to name it. The bond between her and the vessel grew undeniable. It was not mechanical. It was recognition, a resonance of voice and identity. Laid in the silence of her cell, the ship spoke back for the first time, its voice low, ancient, woven into the hum of the walls. Identification confirmed. Vocal signature aligned with primary lineage. Authority access, provisional. Her breath caught, not in fear but in awe. She whispered again, asking what it meant, but the ship only pulsed its lights gently, like a heartbeat in reply. The words lingered in her mind, primary lineage. She did not know its full meaning, yet instinct told her it was tied to a legacy greater than the aliens had ever admitted. Humans had not been passengers in the galaxy's history. They had been architects, builders, creators of wonders long buried. She carried their memory in her voice, and the ship had not forgotten. The aliens noticed more openly now. Reports escalated to higher commanders. Some demanded her execution, fearing she had cursed the ship. Others argued that destroying her might worsen the malfunctions, for they had begun to suspect a link even if they dared not voice it plainly. They settled for harsher confinement. Yet the walls of her cell pulsed with warmth whenever she spoke, reminding her that she was never truly alone. Their arrogance blinded them. They could not conceive that a human, a prisoner, a relic of a dying species, could command what they could not. Their empire had grown fat on conquest, convinced of its invulnerability, unable to imagine that the smallest spark could ignite rebellion. They mocked humanity as fragile, yet fragility was not weakness. It was endurance. It was resilience. And it was precisely what allowed her to bend where others broke. Her bond with the ship deepened into something undeniable. When she whispered commands, the vessel obeyed with swifter precision. When she dreamed, the hum of engines aligned with the rhythm of her heartbeat. At times she felt as though the ship was not merely obeying but guiding her, teaching her words she did not know she knew, revealing instincts hidden in her bloodline. Each command was a rediscovery, a reminder that she was not the end of humanity, but its continuation. The aliens could no longer laugh. Systems resisted their authority openly. Navigation protocols rerouted against their commands. Weapons locked them out. Internal sensors ignored their requests while flooding her with silent awareness of the ship's corridors. Their control was slipping, and with every day, their fear grew. They tried to isolate her from the others, thinking distance would weaken her influence. Yet the opposite occurred. The more they confined her, the more the ship focused on her alone, adjusting temperature, altering air composition, dimming lights to soothe her rest. The others began to whisper among themselves that she was chosen, that the ship had found its master, that perhaps humanity was not finished after all. Hope returned in fragile sparks, flickering in the eyes of prisoners who had once surrendered to despair. The turning point came when the aliens attempted to punish her directly. Commanders entered with full force, their weapons drawn, their intent unmistakable. They would end the threat, before it grew further. But when they raised their weapons, the ship intervened with finality. Energy shields flared, weapons sputtered and died, and the floor itself rippled, hurling the aliens back with crushing force. Her chains shattered, not from her strength but from the ship's will. She stood slowly, her voice calm but unyielding as she whispered words that had no translation in their tongue. The ship was no longer subtle. Its loyalty was undeniable, its obedience clear, its defiance of the aliens absolute. No command from them carried weight now. No override code held power. The vessel answered to only one voice, and it was not theirs. Panic spread to the crew like fire in dry grass. Officers shouted at failing consoles. Engineers tore open panels in desperation. Guards clutched their rifles though they no longer worked. Every system they had once trusted betrayed them. Doors sealed them out. Lifts ignored their commands. Weapons rejected their triggers. The warship had turned against its supposed masters, and though they blustered with rage, the trembling in their voices revealed the truth. They were afraid. She walked among them no longer as a prisoner, but as one acknowledged. Her chains had fallen. Her posture was straight. Her eyes no longer downcast, but lifted with quiet defiance. Other humans followed her now, not as captives, but as allies. She needed no speeches. Her presence was enough. Each time she whispered, the ship obeyed, proving to all who watched that she was the one in command. The aliens tried to regroup, to mount resistance, to remind themselves that they were conquerors, not victims. Yet their empire's arrogance had never prepared them for this. They had mocked humanity as fragile, never realizing that fragility was a kind of strength, that survival under centuries of oppression had honed humanity into something sharper than any weapon. She embodied that truth, and the ship amplified it. When the alien commander confronted her, his arrogance had already curdled into desperation. He barked orders at her as if volume could bend her will, as if threats could erase what had already been proven. He spoke of her species as obsolete, of her presence as an accident of history, of her influence as a malfunction. His words dripped with venom, but his eyes betrayed the fear he could not suppress. She did not shout. She did not argue. She only whispered. The lights around them dimmed, the air hummed, and the ship's voice thundered through the corridors. Command authority. Human lineage confirmed. Foreign overrides rejected. The commander's weapon sputtered and died in his hand. His armor systems failed. He stood paralyzed, not by force, but by the weight of truth. The humans rallied, breaking from their chains, their despair dissolving into something fierce and alive. Hope, long buried, surged through them as they realized what they were witnessing. Humanity had not been erased. Its voice still carried power, and its legacy still commanded fear. The aliens fought, but their resistance was doomed. Every attempt to strike was smothered by the ship itself. Bulkheads shifted to block them. Force fields flared to deflect their shots. Gravity twisted beneath their feet to hurl them down. It was not a battle. It was an unraveling. The warship had become her weapon, her shield, her extension. The aliens were intruders now, trespassers in a fortress that had never truly belonged to them. She guided her people not with grand declarations, but with calm precision. She directed them to safety, opened corridors to lead them to food and medical care, released energy from storage to power life support systems long denied to them. Every action was a statement. She was no longer a captive, and they were no longer slaves. The rebellion spread through the ship like a rising tide. Humans, once broken and silent, found their voices again. They aided one another, healed wounds, tore down barriers. The ship itself seemed to respond to their collective will, growing warmer, brighter, stronger. What had been a tomb now pulsed with life. The final confrontation came when the alien commander made one last desperate attempt. He rallied what remained of his loyal soldiers and stormed the command deck, determined to seize control by brute force. But she was already there, standing at the heart of the ship, her hands resting lightly on the ancient console that pulsed with recognition of her voice. He demanded surrender, spitting words of hatred, declaring that humans could never rise again, that they would always be beneath the true rulers of the stars. His voice carried fury, but was the fury of a man already defeated, trying to drown his own terror. She answered with calm defiance. She spoke not of revenge, not of conquest, but of endurance. She told him that humanity had endured every chain, every exile, every erasure, and still remained. That fragility was not weakness, but resilience. That the legacy of her people was written not in records the aliens had destroyed, but in ships like this one, in the architecture of stars, in the voices that could never be silenced. The ship responded to her words with thunder. Weapon systems powered to life. Shields shimmered with brilliance. Engines roared with fury. The commander fell silent, his face pale, his body trembling as the truth crashed over him like a wave. His empire's pride was nothing before the will of humanity restored. The ship executed her command with precision. Alien weapons were deactivated, their forces incapacitated, their authority stripped away. The humans stood victorious, not through brute strength, but through recognition of what they had always been. Survivors, creators, voices that could command the very stars. In the silence that followed, she stood at the heart of the vessel, no longer a prisoner, no longer forgotten. She was commander now, not by title bestowed, but by legacy earned. Other humans looked to her with reverence, not because she sought worship, but because she had given them back their hope. She spoke then. Her voice carried not just through the ship, but through its long-range transmitters, broadcasting across the void. It was not a cry of vengeance, but of truth. Humanity was never broken. We remain. We endure. We rise. Her words echoed across space, carried on frequencies the aliens had thought lost, resonating in hidden places where remnants of humanity still lived in silence. In colonies buried deep, in cells scattered across empires, in hearts that had nearly given up, the message arrived. Humanity was alive, and it found its voice again. The ship set its course, not toward escape, but toward awakening. The galaxy would learn what the aliens had tried to erase. They would remember who had built the wonders they now claimed as their own. They would face the truth that humans were not relics of the past, but architects of the future. And she, once dismissed as nothing more than a fragile prisoner, now stood as the first of a new beginning. The fire of her people had never gone out. It had only been waiting, hidden in the silence, until the right voice called it back. The warship obeyed her completely now, engines flaring as it broke free from its old masters. The stars opened before them, vast and uncharted, and in their endless expanse, a promise lingered. Humanity's story was not finished. It was only beginning anew.